Why does Progressive work hard for truckers? Because truckers unite the world. They unite kids with their first drum sets and parents with earplugs. But truckers can't do this if they're not on the road. That's why Progressive has over 360 heavy truck employees to help truckers stay on time and on track. Quote truck insurance today in as little as 8 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates.
For a small business owner, every day is full of surprises. Some great, some not so great. Like when a client cancels their order at the last minute. But here's a surprise you will like. Progressive provides small business owners with 30 customizable coverage options to help keep their business going strong. So go ahead, surprise yourself. Get a quote in as little as 8 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates and third-party insurers. Coverage is not available in all states or for all vehicles and coverage selections.
This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Do you ever have a story that you just can't get out of your head?
One that you play the details of over and over with your friends?
Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan.
And this is Justice Pending,
a weekly true crime podcast where we discuss tantalizing crimes with more questions than answers.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Texas Justice Live podcast tour tonight in Waco. I'm your host, Claire Sanama, and I'm joined by my special guest co-host, Andrea Lozano Santiago.
Hi guys, it's great to be here.
A special thanks to the Ravens Nook for hosting us and for Rogue Media Network for setting all of this up. We couldn't do it without them. So as someone who works in true crime, I see my fair share of murder and mayhem. And if you're here tonight, you must be drawn to stories of true crime as well. And you may not always understand why, other than the fact that they interest you. But I really want to get into the science behind it and why so many of us find true crime fascinating. It's not a moral defect. Don't worry. You're in good company. And yeah, we're going to talk about what, a part of our biology makes us interested in true crime. And I'm excited for the conversation.
All right. Yes, we're going to get into it all tonight. But let's start with the true crime stories that first hooked us. Claire, what was that case that first got you into true crime?
So for me, it was JonBenet Ramsey on the cover of People magazine. Can you see it right now? Yes. The curls, the beautiful face, everything about her was like a doll. And there she was, memorialized on People magazine in a stunning murder mystery that, to this day, has yet to be solved. Andrea, what do you think about that case? Are we ever going to get to the bottom of it?
Honestly, I've wondered the same thing myself. I took a lot of classes in high school that had to do with this kind of stuff. And honestly, I don't know. I think it'll always be left up for discussion. I think we're always going to wonder and have more questions. And I think that's how a lot of these stories also have been,
Yeah, it can be unsettling not to have those final resolutions, actually know who's responsible. I'm an eternal optimist, which might surprise you since I work in true crime, but I really do believe if it's not good, it's not over yet, and that we will get answers one day. I think the advances in DNA technology, in the way that people have been able to take samples from Ancestry.com, 23andMe, and do these genetic family trees and find people who are not in the normal, DNA system, because a lot of people don't realize that unless you've committed a crime, you don't have your DNA in a system that can be searched. It's not in a national database. And the other way that it gets there is through voluntary submissions, through these various, very interesting services that people pay for. And, there's different boxes that you can check, right? And if you check the box that says, yes, you can include my sample in your repository of data, then it can get scraped by law enforcement. You may like that, you may not like that, but it is a fact of our times, right? So I'm hopeful that perhaps the JonBenet Ramsey case can be solved that way.
I do think that the science behind it, definitely, like, with the ancestry and stuff and that, the technology coming out, I really do think, and maybe I'm not as optimistic about it, but
Right.
I do think I agree, sometimes we have to be optimistic about those things as well.
Well, you want to talk about a case that's hard to be optimistic about. It's the Nancy Guthrie, right?
Yes.
Where is Nancy, y'all? Where is Nancy?
Yeah.
She disappeared in Tucson, Arizona. We know that she was taken from her home and no trace, right? Nothing to suggest who did this, why they did it, where she is today. So there's always a new mystery, right? But we were talking about science, so let's get into the science of why we are interested in true crime. I think it's really fascinating that scientists have looked at this and they've been able to do various scientific studies looking at your brain, looking at your eyes, looking at other parts of the whole human experience for what keeps our attention. And yeah, I'm curious, what have you heard about why we might be interested in true crime? Do you have any sort of pop psychology theories?
Honestly, I think it just challenges like the idea of being interested in true crime. Like, it's such an interesting thing, and I think a lot of people, whenever you bring it up to them and you say, "Oh yeah, I watch murder documentaries or docuseries on Netflix," a lot of people give you that questionable look of why. So I think the science behind it is just, very interesting. And so it turns out our brains might actually be wired to it. And so
Yeah.
I think that that's just very interesting. So
Yes, of course, in my line of work, I run into a lot of people who tell me that they're huge true crime fans, and many actually say that they fall asleep watching murder mysteries, that they fall asleep watching 48 Hours, which was the show that I worked on for CBS News for many years. And the reruns, they play on Investigation Discovery, which is where I have my new show, Killer Confessions, Case Files of a Texas Ranger. See that plug? Just seamless. Seamless. And people tell me, oh, I just turn it on and I just watch it until I fall asleep. These are not exactly nursery rhymes, right? These are not the kind of bedtime stories that you might expect to put you in a state of calm relaxation. But I thought it was really interesting. I was at a true crime conference in Missouri, and I was actually on a panel with another author. His name is Dr. Colton Scrivener, and he's a behavioral scientist, and he wrote a book called Morbidly Curious: A Scientist Explains Why We Can't Look Away. And it was really fascinating stuff, and he actually did a number of his own original research studies that he talks about in the book. And he talks about going back to original times, right? We, as human beings, as a species, it's just baked into our DNA to be aware of what predators are doing, just threats on our life. And we learn this from watching, in like prehistoric times, right? Watching animals, watching how animals survive, how they hide, how they camouflage, and also how predators stalk their prey and attack. And he has this quote, Dr. Scrivener, where he says, if zebras could watch a documentary about lions hunting, they would. Mm-hmm. Right? Like that's one of his conclusions. And I feel like that really makes sense with why we want to watch true crime, right? These are the super predators, the lions, mm-hmm. the wolf in sheep's clothing among us. Andrea, what do you think about that?
I mean, that comparison honestly really sticks to me because it makes a lot of sense. We study danger because, like, historically understanding that is just like, it helped us survive it. And so because of the knowledge that we have about danger, that, in my opinion, we studied it and we know how to survive it now. So honestly, that comparison's really good.
Yeah, I'd never thought about it either, but I really like it. And it's true that we are all fascinated by the ways that we could die, right? I mean, if you scroll maybe that's just the algorithm for me, but if I'm scrolling, any news site or social media site, the stories about terrible things that you had no idea whatever it is, fingernail clippers could kill you, right? It's always something that, is lurking, a danger lurking behind seemingly safe scenarios. And, spoiler alert, no one gets out alive. I don't know if you realize that, but no one's gonna live forever, despite the longevity movement that's having a moment right now. People are trying to freeze themselves. No one wants to die, right? And so we don't know if it's going to be disease, natural causes, or if it's going to be a very different way to go. And so I think the idea that there are certain things that we can control, and I think we like to believe that we can control our personal safety. We like to think that we can do things to keep ourselves safe, to make sure that we're having our eyes and ears open to possible threats. And one of the things that Dr. Scribner talked about is that the brain places an attention premium on threats. And so he had this really interesting study that actually showed he had people come in to his science laboratory, right? And he had them watch different videos. And so they were hooked up. You could see, what they were focusing on, where their eyes were going, and how long they were staying there. And he showed them various physical interactions. So you saw people shaking hands. You saw people hugging. You saw people giving high fives. And then you saw people punching each other. You saw them wrestling. You saw, arguments where things were thrown. And the level of attention to the violent actions was way higher than the handshake and the hug and the high five. And this was a scientific way of proving that these type of threats hold our attention longer than, the normal experiences. I get this a lot as a journalist. They're like, why aren't there more feel-good, happy stories? Why don't people put the happy stories, at the top of the news? And I mean, sadly, it's not news that the sun rose this morning and you had coffee for breakfast and there was a nice little bird that tweeted on your patio. That's the norm, right? It's these outliers that we want to hear about. And we also want to share the kind of news that has potential to impact someone's life in a big way, right? And if you find out that your neighbor is a murderer, that's news that's going to travel fast, right? You're going to be quick to share that news because it has to do with your personal safety and the safety of people that you care about.
Yeah, I totally agree. My degree was originally in journalism as well. So I always was wondering the same thing. And then it wasn't until I got to school and I was in college and I was learning, we are so attracted to such the negative vibes and all these things. And so, I mean, it's unfortunate to admit sometimes, it feels uncomfortable to admit that. But, we all know that life has an expiration date. We all know that we can't control everything that happens to us. I know that we all wish we could, but, the science behind that. And so I think it's just such an interesting and fascinating way because, nobody wants to teach us where to look or how to be safe and stuff. We want to hear about these stories and know how to protect ourselves and stuff like that. And I think we figure that out through the news and the negative stuff that we learn.
Right.
And so I think I've heard it a lot of times too, is you don't always have to think about the negative. Put your phone down for a little bit. But that's why we keep looking at our phones. That's why we keep looking at the news, is because we want to hear about that stuff as well. And so I can see why, scientifically it makes sense. So
yeah, it's always interesting to me that violence can draw our attention away from almost everything else. In this study, they were also asked questions about what the people looked like, what color hair they had, And in the violent interactions, the subjects were less likely to be able to recall that information because they were drawn to what was happening. And our normal reaction whenever we meet someone or we see people is to look at their faces, right? We learn that just from infants. That's something that we're drawn to, the eyes and the face. And usually you can tell someone, what someone looks like, basically. But if you've seen something violent, a lot of times that memory is replaced by the violent action. And that's why a lot of times people who witness violent crimes and they're trying to help and give a sketch of the suspect, they have to go through all sorts of relaxation techniques, and some hypnosis has been used, controversial, but there are other ways that have to be employed, because the initial reaction of most people will say, I have no idea what they looked like, but I saw the gun, right? That's what they'll remember. And they will oftentimes even give inaccurate descriptions, eyewitness descriptions. And so it's just part of the whole picture of what it's like to be exposed to true crime, and where, that all goes in our minds. And there's another interesting book on this topic, Andrea. It's called Savage Appetites. I mean, we are in a bookstore, so I got to talk about the books. And this is by Rachel Monroe, and she talks about, she says it's a methodical examination of just what it is about murder that obsesses us. And so she looks at really starting in about 2017, which was the first year that they had CrimeCon. Has anyone been to CrimeCon? I've never been myself, but it keeps getting bigger, y'all. It gets bigger every year. Yeah, so it's CrimeCon. It's a conference for true crime enthusiasts, and they bring in a lot of people from various true crime shows like 2020, Dateline, 48 Hours. The Oxygen Network, that has all sorts of shows. Seduced to Slay is one. I was actually on an episode of Seduced to Slay. I wasn't seducing anyone to slay, but I was talking about a really disturbing case that happened outside of Dallas, where a woman had convinced her lover to kill her husband. This was how to solve her problem. And so she seduced this guy, this long haul trucker, and convinced him that if he killed her husband, who was a firefighter, that, they could be together. And it was just unbelievable, like so many of these stories are, but it's really true. It actually happened, right? And I think the whole truth is stranger than fiction element of it is what really gets me, the highs and lows of human behavior, like what we're actually capable of as human beings. It goes to this everyday choice that we have, like to go towards the light or to go towards the dark. And in all the cases that I've covered, I've seen people make this slow, sometimes faster, but this incremental steps towards becoming really bad. I haven't seen anyone who just starts out bad, right? And it's like that age-old adage of, be careful what you think about. Be careful what you the thoughts you entertain in your mind, because a lot of times people start entertaining these dark thoughts, these revenge fantasies, and something slips, right? And some of these people actually act out these things, even though if you end up on an episode of 48 Hours or Dateline or 2020, I can tell you probably won't have committed a crime before, right? Mm-hmm. Those are the kinds of stories that our audiences, really identify with, because they think, oh my gosh, that guy looks like he could be my neighbor. That guy could be my doctor, right? For some reason, there's a large number of doctors that murder people. Yeah. I don't know what that's about. But if you read my book, Killer Story, The Truth Behind True Crime Television, I have probably 3 or 4 murdering doctors in there. And it was something that my editor pointed out. He was like, what's up with all the doctors killing people? I'm like, I don't know. All my doctors have been very caring people. I don't know where these people are coming from. But it's, it can happen really to anyone. It's something that I really believe that we're all capable of murder. I think we have different motivations and different triggers. I think a lot of people would kill for someone that they love to protect them, right? To protect their child, to protect their spouse, their sister, their brother. But whenever that gets flipped and people think that they have to kill to protect themselves, that's really when it starts to get twisted. Yeah. So in this book, Savage Appetites, Rachel Monroe talks about how true crime interest has been rising in the past decade. And interestingly enough, the actual murder rate all across the country has been dropping. So there are fewer murders. You probably don't feel like that, right? You hear about them all the time.
Oh, yeah.
But because they're outliers, they're reported in the media because it's newsworthy, because it's unusual that these things have happened. And if you read as many murder headlines as I do, you will see these patterns of, it's like the first murder in this town in 17 years or, whatever it might be. And that's what makes it so unusual, right? And that's why it's news, but it's not actually common, which is a little bit of good news in a dark world.
Yeah,
Andrea.
I think that's really, that is nice to think about, that it's not super common. But I think that the amount that we hear about it and stuff. And so, honestly, going back to something that you said earlier, it's like, what strikes me is that so many killers convince themselves that they're they're solving this problem.
Yeah.
And that they're actually but they're actually just creating a far bigger one for themselves. And and that to me is just something that is really interesting to think about as well. Yeah. It's almost like impossible to understand that perspective, for me personally. Yeah. And so I think that I've always, you hear it all the time, you are who you hang out with and stuff, but sometimes those people hang out with people that never could have thought about it.
Right.
So I just, and you also brought up a good point earlier too, is like you see it on the news, like, oh, that's someone that I could have gone to school with and stuff. And like Luigi Mangione, I know that's like a hot take right here. I know that's not entirely like true crime and stuff, but
it is.
It's just more of like, that guy seems like the sweetest person, seems like has just such a good personality. If I would have seen him on the street, I would have tried to be his friend and talk to him and stuff. And so that's kind of, so I'm really glad you brought that up, because it just it made it click in my brain as well. So
yeah, Luigi Mangione, that was actually when I launched Justice Pending. That was the case that launched it for me. This is my spin-off podcast. My first one is Final Days on Earth, deep dives on cold cases. And then Justice Pending, I started in 2025. I was supposed to start it, but I ended up starting it right at the end of, I believe, 2024, whenever the United Healthcare CEO was murdered on the streets of Midtown Manhattan. And my co-host who lives in New York was in Midtown at that time, Susan. And so she was like, you're not going to believe, they, the sirens, they've closed off the streets. And she's like, New Yorkers couldn't be bothered. No one cares. Everyone's just going about their business. But she was, pretty shocked, and as was I. And we started right then. I think we went and recorded our first episode 24 hours after the shooting, because I just couldn't believe that this had gone on in the streets of Manhattan and that he'd gotten away, right? Yeah. The planning, yes. And I mean, I've heard so many different reactions to this, and I'm like, are we going to let the Luigi Mangiones of society decide who lives and dies? Yeah. We're going to let people be executed in the streets with no trial and no jury and no due process? I definitely don't think that's the solution to our healthcare problem, right? This is a very talk about vigilante. This is disturbing, but I think the story itself has really hit a nerve on so many different levels, and people continue to talk about Luigi as though he's some type of folk hero. You know, it's Luigi merch, y'all, selling out. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. For the longest time, Luigi merch was just flying off the shelves, flying off of Amazon, everywhere, sold out. And it's appalling to me to make a hero of someone who would do something like this.
You know, I almost wonder if it's literally only just because he seems attractive to like the first
that's
visual.
definitely
And
part
I
of it.
really think that that's definitely just because I was on Instagram and that's all that would pop up. And this was before like I was like super interested in like true crime. Like this was before that time. And honestly, I think that might have been that case that was like really like put me on the map of true crime and stuff. But you know, I would assume, like, is it just because he was attractive to people?
I think he's an Ivy League graduate. Of course, he has no criminal record. He is young. He's attractive by most standards, right?
Yeah.
And so people are going to have all sorts of reactions to that. I mean, people felt like Ted Bundy was, you know, a handsome serial killer, good-looking guy, right? He had groupies. It's weird out there, y'all. It gets strange. So going back to sort of how true crime, you know, fans see themselves, Rachel Monroe, who wrote Savage Appetites, talks about 4 archetypes. And I'm curious, you know, if you guys feel like you fit into one of these. So the 4 archetypes for true crime fans are the detective. Any detectives in the house? That's definitely me, right? Yes, detective. The victim. Identify with the victim. The defender, you think people have been wrongfully convicted, you want to find out who's been framed, you know, and even the killer, right? No one's going to admit they identify with us. But, you know, it gets interesting. It gets interesting to think that those are the typical, you know, those really are the main buckets, right? So, you know, what makes a killer?
You know, honestly, I wonder that. I really do. Claire, you're often asked this question, you know, and from your perspective, is there like any like commodities like in most like, you know, killers?
There are some commonalities I have seen across various types of murders. I've seen a lot of grievance collectors. Do you know what I mean by that? People who feel like they've been wronged and they just hold on to that. They want you to know that they shouldn't have been fired from this job. And you would think it happened yesterday, but it actually happened, you know, 10 years ago, and they're still holding on to it. And they're also holding on to the guy that cut him off in traffic and the neighbor that trimmed the tree and didn't talk to the HOA, you know. They're grievance collectors. And so they have a long list of things that they feel like, you know, they've been wronged by the world. And this starts to create this idea that they need to get even, that they've been disrespected, that they have to take back the power, right? I see that a lot. I also see an obsession with control. This usually manifests itself, the 2 most common reasons that people kill, love or money. And so it's that kind of control of someone that they love that is now no longer interested in a relationship with them, that wants to have a relationship with someone else. Loud car. So this might be, you know, they've said, I want a divorce. This might be, they're just dating and they're dating someone else now. They want to break up. And it's the, if I can't have you, no one can kind of mentality. Mm-hmm. And that's a very scary place to be. And then the idea that money comes into the picture. More often than not, money is a big motivator for people to commit murder. And it's always unbelievable to me because if they would just stop and think about it, mm-hmm. they would realize that by committing murder, they're going to lose access to all of their bank accounts. Oh, they will not. I mean, it doesn't end well, right? The amount of people that get away with murder forever slim margins, but they really believe they're going to be the one. They're going to outsmart everyone. They're going to have their, secret accounts. They're going to frame someone else for the murder. They're going to make it look like a suicide. There's so many different possibilities where they think they're going to be the ones to get away with it.
Yeah, I can think of a couple cases like that,
Yeah.
Maybe even like the Murdoch murders.
Yes.
There's so there's like a couple that right off the bat that when you were speaking about that, it's just like, you think that you get away. It's money, love, relationships, family. And like I said earlier, it's so crazy to me that killers convince themselves that they're like solving this problem when in all reality, they're just creating such a bigger one. Like it really, really is just so interesting. And so what are some common like misconceptions that people have about true crime journalism,
Yeah, so there are quite a few that I've come across. Probably one of the biggest ones is that people believe that we pay for interviews. That if you're on Dateline or 2020 or 48 Hours, you've been cut a big fat check to appear. Mm-hmm. And that just doesn't happen. Because those big three are part of news organizations, right? Dateline's on NBC with NBC News, 2020 ABC News, 48 Hours CBS News. And so as part of news standards, they don't pay for these interviews. Dr. Phil used to pay people for interviews, right? But that's a different kind of show, right? If you're actually watching one of the news magazine true crime shows, you can know that those people were not paid to appear. And that's because they would essentially become employees, right? And they would be trying to please their boss, right? And they would want to say what they thought we wanted to hear. And we want people to be fully honest, their authentic answers, and not have other motivations thinking, well, if I don't answer the right way, then, maybe they won't pay me or whatever they might think, right? And so there is no payment for people to appear on the show. The only exceptions to that, there's always exceptions. If they hire like a special consultant.
Yeah.
And they'll be labeled. They'll be listed as a special consultant or a news consultant. And usually that is like a last-ditch effort by the true crime producer that's trying to get people to talk about this case. And they need someone to kind of weigh in like on some type of legal issue, or maybe it's a private investigator who's going to give a different perspective on alternate theories or suspects. And so those are kind of those special exceptions to the rule there.
Yeah, I also think, movies, TV shows, and like, those have probably created a lot of misconceptions from it as well.
Oh, yeah.
Because you see it on, you watch TV shows that make it seem like that's like the situation. And, I wouldn't have known that unless I had a journalism degree. And so, thankfully I do have a journalism degree. But yeah, people are often surprised by that, and they're often surprised with how much ethical journalism there is and how there are some like rules with that as well. Right. So yeah, I think it's really interesting, and thank you for like letting us know, because I think movies and TVs really do change that perspective. So
they do. And I mean, another misconception is people think that everyone has to talk to you if you're the media about a case. No one has to talk to you, y'all. No one, not the police, not the prosecutors. No one has to actually give an interview. So the art of getting people to agree to sit down, to get in the chair, as we say in the biz, is a whole job description, right? It is a personal decision if they're going to decide to do an interview. And a lot of times they have to get like multiple layers of approval across higher and higher offices. And so the only types of interviews that you can get without that sort of personal, will you agree to do an interview and agree to be interviewed and come at this location at this time, is like the public, press conferences or public statements in trial. A lot of times judges will allow cameras in the courtroom. And so that is a way to get a lot of the stuff on camera, on the record. But the public record of these crimes does belong to the public, right? These are crimes against the peace and dignity of the state, right? I love that language in indictments, right? And so when someone commits murder, it's not like you can decide not to press charges, right? It's something that becomes an offense to the entire community because it's a danger to the entire community. And so these cases are the state of Texas versus the killer, right? And so that is an important distinction with these cases that, of course, they are very personal murders, right? Every murder is a personal tragedy for someone. And that's not lost on me. But the public side of that is that these murders don't happen in a vacuum. And these murders affect all of us, and they affect communities. They affect the fabric of communities. And so the public record that exists through the trial, through the police reports, through, news reporting on the case in these public hearings and venues, that's part of public safety, is being able to know what's happening in your community. And I think that we have to recognize that we want to live in a society where we don't have blinders on, right? We want to know. We don't want terrible things to happen, but when they happen, like we do have a right to know about them. And so that's really that fine line with true crime, journalism. A lot of people will see it as sensationalizing these crimes. I really feel like the truth of these murders, of these cases, is sensational enough. You don't have to add anything to it for it to be shocking, for it to be tragic. And the last thing I want to do is make it any more painful for anyone. The facts are the facts. Mm-hmm. And that's really what I look for in these cases are what case stands on its own. Mm-hmm. What case, just looking at everything that's out in the public record, is truly unbelievable. Yeah. And that's something that really drives me in mm-hmm. selecting cases. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that we all learn about. All the public information is public information. That's always going to be that way. I mean, nowadays, public information is even more public. There's AI, ChatGPT. Yeah. You search up someone's first and last name, you find out everything. You can see obituaries, stuff like that. And so, I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings is that, there's not empathy, but, there is. And so
I thought it was really interesting, both of the books that I talked about, Morbid Curiosity and Savage Appetites, they had very similar inscriptions to the book. And they both said something to the effect of, to those with dark minds but soft hearts. Mm-hmm. And I've really found that to hold true. I think part of what makes true crime interesting for an individual is that they actually feel so much empathy for this mm-hmm. crime, for everyone who's affected by it. And that's why they're drawn to the story, right? Not because they're cold and heartless and callous and it means nothing to them and it's just names and faceless people. No, like those are the people that aren't interested in true crime, right? They don't care about these stories. But if you actually are a people person and you are empathetic, these stories grab you and they stay with you and they break your heart, right? And that's what keeps your interest a lot of times. So, I've found that people working in true crime do have a deep level of empathy for the victims and for people who are accused of these crimes and say that they're innocent. There's a lot of work that goes into false convictions, right? And wrongful convictions. So, you can look at it, from a variety of different angles and still feel empathy for a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, most people I know who consume true crime, they're not celebrating those criminals. And, I look at it, I'm not thinking, oh, wow, congratulations on this. You're connecting with those victims. You are, and you're trying to understand what happened, especially if you've been through a traumatic situation or an event like that, especially those kinds of situations. They bring you empathy in that sense as well. So,
Definitely. Well, should we talk about, I was going to talk about some of the big cases that I've covered in Texas where I've seen a lot of the things that we've talked about today. So probably one of the biggest ones is the Kaufman County DA murders. I don't know if you're familiar with that case, but this is one where you talk about a grievance collector and you talk about delusional. This is Eric Williams. So he was once upon a time a Boy Scout. He was in the Texas National Guard, and he was a justice of the peace. So he was sitting up in a judge's position. He was presiding over cases. He was ruling. He was part of, quasi law enforcement, really. And he was working in Kaufman County, and it's so strange to think that his slide started with something as simple as computer monitors. But y'all, he took computer monitors from the Kaufman County DA's office home with him to set up a home office. I mean, that doesn't sound criminal to me, but he didn't have permission. There were forms he didn't get filled out. There were things that weren't signed off on. And he didn't want to go through the proper channels. He just wanted to set up a home office. And I can still see it clear as day. He takes one monitor under each arm, and he's briskly walking through the lobby, and he's on video surveillance because it's a county building and they keep the video running. It's the weekend. He just popped in there. He had a key. He is the justice of the peace. He had a key, got the monitors, put them in his truck, went home, set up his home office. Well, the DA notices some monitors are missing, right? They end up confronting him about this. He doesn't want to budge, doesn't want to give them back. Things escalate to a degree that I think probably everyone regrets, but he ends up getting charged with felony theft because of the price of the monitors, because they were county property, and they tell him, hey, you can resign and this will end, we'll drop the charges. He says, no, I want to go to trial. So he actually goes to trial. He was a justice of the peace, goes to trial. Again, he's on camera doing this. Like, he straight up, he stole them. Like, there's really no denying it. But he thought he could sway a jury, everything else. He loses the trial. He's disbarred, loses his law license, and loses his mind. So you can see on his forensic computer records that night after the verdict, he started searching for the home addresses of the district attorney, the prosecutor, the judge. He had a hit list. He got 3 slots down on the hit list before they figured out it was him, because you wouldn't suspect that it would be him. But he killed Mark Hassey, who was the prosecutor, killed him almost on the steps of the Kaufman County Courthouse. And then he killed Mike McClelland and his wife Cynthia in their home on Easter weekend, dressed up in SWAT gear, knocked on the door. They thought they were opening the door for police, and it was Eric Williams, and he murdered everyone. So that story has really stayed with me. And I had the very disturbing experience of interviewing Eric Williams in jail after he'd been convicted of capital murder and was awaiting his punishment phase, which he was given the death penalty. But it was just like looking into a completely void human soul. Like I just fully believe that he turned over to that dark side, and the part of him that was good, the part of him that knew right from wrong, was gone. And it was my first serial killer. I always say you never forget your first. And I cannot forget it. I cannot forget what it was like to look back at those ink blots that were his eyes now. And I've seen pictures of him from before the murders, and he didn't look like that. Like, there was still light in his eyes, and it was just gone. So that's probably the most extreme example that I really have of someone who had every reason to be good and to be set up to be a law-abiding citizen and contribute to society, and just went so far the other direction.
Yeah, that's, that case is such a powerful example of just grievance and like revenge.
Yeah.
On the surface, it looked unimaginable. It looked like it could have never happened that way. But when you examine that timeline,
Yeah.
you can see that the years of resentment that he had and he was holding on to, and it was all building up underneath the surface. That's a powerful, powerful case that just shows like how dark it can get. So
Truly. Yeah. I like to tell people no one gets through this life without being wronged, but we all have a choice to let it go, right? It's so easy to say, it's hard to do, but it's so important not to hold on to that.
No, I agree,
Because it can, maybe you won't end up becoming a serial killer, I hope not, but it is just not a pleasant way to live, right?
Yeah.
So just having that ability to say, I'm going to let that go, and today's a new day. That is a superpower for sure. So yeah. Well, I know we're kind of pushing up against the time here, and I want to leave time for Q&A. So I think we can probably open it up now.
Okay. Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, honestly, like this discussion's just been so like, it gives me a light into kind of your world as well. And so I appreciate that as well. And thank you for letting me co-host with you.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that's wonderful.
Andrea, thank you for being here.
But yeah.
Yeah, in the hot seat with me. I love it. But yeah, we'll open it up for questions, and I'm happy to take any questions you have. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your support.
Eric Williams,
Yes.
how much did you and others believe the man was telling any part of the truth when you interviewed him?
Oh, I didn't believe anything that Eric Williams said was true. And he pretty much refused to talk about anything to do with the crime. He wanted to tell me how bad it was in jail. Yeah, it's real bad in jail. Don't go there if you can avoid it.
He was wrong because he thought he could take government property.
Right. Yes.
Did him wrong.
Yes, that it wasn't theft, that these were, his office supplies, and he was the justice of the peace, and he could take them anywhere he wanted. And, he, in his mind, didn't do anything wrong.
Did he ever say why he took them? They're just monitors. They're not even the CPU.
Yeah, he wanted to set up, his home office. He wanted to have the monitors, you use like a small monitor, and you have like your supercomputer desk, or your command center. And yeah, that's what he wanted to do. Would have never imagined that would end up in triple homicide. Yeah.
We recently watched the staircase murder.
Yes.
Okay, I'm still like, that was the weirdest thing. Like, it was just like, I don't really what happened.
Oh, the staircase murder. Yes, that's one of those that you can go down the rabbit hole on and come out any side, right? I tend to believe that she was pushed, that it was a murder, especially because of the other person in his past that fell down the stairs and died. That to me, I was like, okay, guys, this is not a coincidence. Like, you don't have two people dying like that in your life. It's pretty rare for someone to die falling downstairs, much less twice, much less two women. It really, that was the moment for me where I was like, I want to believe that this didn't happen, this was an accident, that this wasn't murder, but I don't think I can. I fall on the side of it being murder.
Yeah, we have an owl in our yard. And so I'm like, please don't go outside because I'm not like going to be in jail. Like,
Yes.
and we hike a lot too. And so you always hear about these people who get
Yes.
Ooh.
Pushed. Yeah.
good.
Yes.
And I really think they can fall. As
Yep.
a hiker, you can fall.
You can.
It's like you put yourself in all these situations and I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not a good thing.
Yeah, well, they call it an alpine divorce, right? You guys have heard that, right? You go hiking and only one comes back. 'Cause,
Yep.
Yeah, the other one gets pushed over. It is unbelievable that it has become, there's like a whole series of these types of deaths, right? These types of murders, these accidents that are later investigated. And just as a student of human behavior, it's just fascinating to think of all the ways that they're able to reconstruct that hike and what the conditions were, and what is, what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, and what does the surviving spouse say, about the altercation and how it happened. And, there's so much evidence that ends up being there. And, also just happening on a public trail, right? No one has these trails in their backyard. So these are happening out. That creates a lot of witnesses and conflicting reports. And yeah, the Alpine divorce trend is really, now we have a name for it. So we're going to hear about even more of them, I think. Yeah.
And I think too that if I ever had a to-be spouse wanted me to sign a life insurance policy,
Yeah.
that is like a red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great point. I like to tell people, if you're not worried about the person sleeping next to you, you're probably going to be okay. Because that is the biggest danger, is your intimate partner. That's the person, if, it's rare for anyone to be a victim of murder. It is rare. But if you're going to be one, it's, 75, 80% likely that it will be your intimate partner. The other most likely person is anyone you let into your home. So a lot of times, that can be other friends, relatives, but I've seen it happen most often where it's the people that you let come fix your appliances. The people that are working on various things inside and outside your home, but they start to see your patterns. You don't know what they're observing, right? Are they observing when you come and go? If you leave doors unlocked, have they, swiped your garage clicker? These things happen, right? They don't always end up in murder. They might just steal something from you, or, it's all very unpleasant to be a victim of any type of crime. But they're the simplest things you can do. Have cameras on your entrances and exits, just a little doorbell camera front and back. Leave the light on, y'all. You want them to know that it's there. It's not supposed to be a hidden camera. It's a deterrent for people to, if you're going to choose a house to case, you're not going to pick the one with the cameras, right? And I always tell people a big barking dog is a really great deterrent as well. It's you can disable a lot of alarm systems, but it's hard to disable a dog, and most people don't want to hurt a dog. Even, honor among thieves and killers. I've seen dogs killed, but it's rare. Usually they don't want to go there, even though they're there to do something terrible, right? So yeah, a barking dog is a very good security system. So I really am optimistic. Even despite being in this industry, I look on the sunny side of things, but I am a realist, and I do look for ways to minimize my own risk. I mean, I don't like to park in parking garages if I can avoid it. Seen too many people kidnapped in parking garages, right? I'm petite. It's easily be thrown into a trunk, right? So it's just little things like that. And I have such a, Rolodex for all of these different crimes, and I'm driving up and down the interstate, and I cross these different cities, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's where the killer was from. Oh yeah, they found a body off exit 422. It's too much for me. So I have to do what I can to feel like I'm, making smart choices where I have some experience, Any more questions? Yeah.
Do you know what the rate is for homicide cases solved versus unsolved?
Oh man. So I know it changes so much in different jurisdictions, and that's something that police departments, sheriff's departments, they really try to get their unsolved rates down low. They want to have it below 10%. They try to clear cases, So a lot of times the easiest solution, the easiest explanation for a murder is the right one. So many cases are solved very easily. But it's really those outliers. I mean, if I had to do an average, my guess would be somewhere to 10 to 20% are unsolved cold cases. But that would be a guess across jurisdictions, because it can vary wildly. Like if you're talking about Chicago and you're talking about Waco, Texas, the unsolved crimes are going to be really different there. Yeah. Sure.
So is there any research that you have done that may have attributed to solving a crime?
So the biggest one for me was a case out in Keller, Texas, which is a suburb of Fort Worth. And this was really my first big true crime story. And I came across it. I talk about this in my book, but I came across it just in a really short summary of the case at the time in the Dallas Morning News. And they just said, oh, this woman has accepted a plea deal for like the accidental shooting of her husband. It's called deadly conduct. Like, it was just like this really strange little description of this case. And I'm like, who accidentally shoots their husband? Like that doesn't sound like it would be, and who gets a plea deal for murder in Texas? And why are they calling it something different? So I ended up really getting interested in this case. And I had just gone to a journalism conference about data journalism and about how to use all these different databases. And so I got into looking up Michelle Williams, which is a super common name. It's not the actress, right? But I that was her name at the time that she was, that her husband died. And so I got into her history and I looked up all her marriage records and I found all her different aliases. And I found out this was her third husband. And I started to, I found her high school records and found people she'd gone to high school with, and discovered that she was not at all who she seemed. Even though she didn't have a criminal record, it was basically because people were so embarrassed of the things that she'd done to them that they hadn't filed charges about them. But she was like a con artist, and she had been faking all sorts of elaborate things, pregnancies, paternity of her children, just really strange lies. And she had killed her other two ex-husbands were alive, but she had killed their pets. So one, she had convinced a vet that the dog was sick, and the vet actually put the dog down, and then the husband found like all this like empty Benadryl pill, like she had drugged the dog and then brought it to the vet. And this is like really weird stuff. And she had dumped salt in a freshwater fish tank and killed all these exotic fish. And she was pretty cold, and I ended up looking into her background and finding out that about, I want to say it was less than a year, it was around like 8 months before her husband died of a single gunshot wound to the head, her brother-in-law did. And there were 3 people that worked in the family business, and it was her husband, and her brother-in-law. And to this day, she's never been charged with this other murder, but it's still ruled a suicide. But she later tried to say that her husband committed suicide. And it was just really strange. So I was able to uncover a lot of things in the Michelle Williams case. And when my reporting came out, she had this plea deal. And it actually ended up being overturned, in part due to information that came to light in my reporting, including the fact that she was not pregnant with twins. She was 41 years old and had a hysterectomy. So she was not pregnant with twins, but she had printed off sonograms from the internet. She'd Googled it, and she had, framed the sonograms and convinced everyone she was pregnant. And it was all lies. And so eventually, this was my entry into 48 Hours as well. Whenever I wrote this investigative series, I called it Did Michelle Williams Get Away with Murder? And I wrote that and was on a website that I worked for at the time that was called Culture Map Dallas. And when that story came out online, it ended up just having a life of its own, and that got the attention of CBS News and 48 Hours. And so my first contribution there, I was actually on air as a local journalist talking about the case. And so I was so pleased that the plea deal was overturned. She went to trial and she was found guilty, and she got 60 years in prison. So she's still there, which is very satisfying. And she's up to her old tricks there. She's remarried. She's now married behind bars. Yep, that's the whole thing. That's the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, so many people, more often women, but sometimes men, they, if they've had really traumatic relationships and they feel really unsafe, but they want like the emotional connection, there's no one better than someone in prison because they can't physically harm you. They can't leave you. You know where they are at all times, and they can't cheat on you. So,
I mean,
well,
yeah.
caveat there. But it does appeal to a surprisingly large number of people. So, yeah,
That's why there's a whole show on it.
Yeah,
huh?
we could do a whole other show on that for sure. For sure. Well, I know we're getting up on the end time here, and thank you so much for coming. It was a great crowd, and I so appreciate you. And I'll stick around and sign books and talk to anybody. So, yeah.
And thank you, Claire, for sharing your experiences and your insights tonight. I appreciate it. And thank you again. Thank you to Raven's Nook, and thank you to Claire for letting me join.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. Justice Pending is recorded in Dallas, Texas for Rebel Studios. It's hosted by me, Claire Sanama, and Susan Passoni. Our theme music is Bending Truth, licensed at premiumbeat.com. We appreciate all listener feedback. Leave a review wherever you're listening right now, and we might read it on the air. Thanks for joining us.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.
Truckers aren't just moving goods. They're making sure bakers get their chocolate chips and hotels get their tiny soaps. But truckers can't do this if they're not on the road. That's why Progressive has over 360 heavy truck employees to help truckers stay on time and on track. Quote truck insurance today in as little as 8 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you might not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.